The folks, it looks like the folks jumping on the webinar has slowed. So thanks to all of you who are joining us today with the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association and Minnesota Turkey Research and Promotion Council. We wanted to take some time now as we approach the fall migration season to give a High Path status update and some programming updates as well for our membership and those outside of our membership who are invested in the poultry industry. So just a brief overview of our agenda for today. So we're going to take a moment and meet our new state vet and hear from him in regards to his thoughts and vision for the Board of Animal Health. We'll also hear from Dr. Shauna Voss with some biosecurity and NPIP updates, and then some folks within USDA to talk about some programming within their agency. And then I'll wrap up our meeting today to talk about some of Minnesota Turkey Growers Association High Path resources that we have, and then other places as well where you all can find information regarding High Path prevention and response. A few housekeeping items. If you do have questions during any of the presentation, we ask that you type those into the Q&A box. And then at the end, if there are any questions that you would like to ask in person or some clarifying statements, use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you. As you had just heard, this webinar is being recorded and will be housed on the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association members only section of our website. So we will begin with Dr. Brian Hoefs, who was just recently appointed as the state veterinarian for the state of Minnesota. So Dr. Hoefs, welcome.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, I'm Dr. Brian Hoefs, recently appointed. So as of beginning of August, appointed as the executive director of the Board of Animal Health and state veterinarian for Minnesota. Directly previous to that, I was the interim executive director and state vet for Minnesota. So many of you I was able to chat with and meet at your meeting earlier this summer, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you again. So they stripped me of the interim title and gave me the full position. I've been working at the Board of Animal Health in the swine programs for a few years prior to this, so it's kind of been interesting and actually helpful to see what happens in the poultry world, because we're doing a lot of the same things kind of from the ground up in the swine world. Specifically, we're really focusing on your NPIP program to develop our U.S. Swine Health Improvement Program. So it's been a great opportunity to kind of meld those two things together. As far as my vision and goals for the board, I think it's good that Dr. Voss is following me, because she'll probably correct me on things that I'm saying wrong or getting wrong. Ultimately, I want to continue as the leadership of the poultry program has in the past. So I was fortunate to work with Dr. Lauer and certainly appreciate working with Dr. Voss now, and just engaging the industry, making sure that you're part of the response when we do have high path or other disease events that happen in the poultry world. We need your help. We need your guidance to do our job effectively. So I rely heavily on our poultry folks at the board in our agency, but as well, I really rely on you folks too, to weigh in on what works and what doesn't work, and we work through this together. I think I will leave it at that, just to help keep your agenda going. And if anyone has any questions or needs to reach out, feel free. Thanks, Ashley.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Hoefs. So it's a pretty good segue, him mentioning Dr. Shauna Voss. If Shauna, you want to tee up and get ready to share some biosecurity and NPIP updates and anything else you deem relevant in regards to a high path with our folks today. Welcome.
Perfect. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
All right. So I was asked to give a little bit of a biosecurity update as well as NPIP updates. And this is just a reminder that we're into fall. The fall equinox has passed, and now we're in that peak migration period. And so I think this is a timely update in order to make sure that we're all kind of prepared for whatever might come our way. We've been fortunate that High Path has been really quiet this summer and into the fall, and I hope it stays that way. But that doesn't mean that other diseases and other types of influenzas might potentially pop up as well. So this is just a good reminder to be prepared for whatever might be coming our way. I know a lot of you have seen these bird casts, the website where you can track migration periods and migration activities. And I think it's a good tool to have in our toolbox. And there's just a couple of reminders that I want to mention before we move on to the next thing, which is it is a good tool. It's interesting to look at. It's important to remember that the birdcast is migrating and tracking migrations for all types of birds and not just wild waterfowl that we tend to worry about the most with influenzas. And so, like I said, it's a good tool, but just keep that in mind when you're looking at things. And which leads me to my next thing about biosecurity. It continues to be our primary line of defense against the introduction of all types of poultry diseases into our flocks. And so that's where that biosecurity plan is really, really important. And every farm should have a farm-specific biosecurity plan, and everybody needs to make sure that they're following it. But knowing that we're in our high-risk migration period right now and that there's things that are moving, that's where the concept of conceptual biosecurity really comes into play. And so that's all of the things that are taking into our locations and the setting of that farm and what's happening around us, and making sure that we're adapting our protocols and our policies to accommodate those changes. So, if you guys see harvesting happening in the fields next to you, we might need to change our biosecurity practices if it's starting to attract waterfowl or other critters into that area. Same thing with road construction. We're still in a road construction season right here. So if there's changes in our traffic patterns due to, things that are happening around us, that's an opportunity to look at your plans and look at your protocols and adapt. Our plans need to be fluid enough to accommodate everything that's happening in and around our farms. And I just wanted to bring up an interesting study that happened at the University of Minnesota, and this hasn't been published yet, but I think it's coming. Abby Hoefs, Sally Knoll, and Aaron Cordes did a research study looking at biosecurity protocols and avoiding errors. And so they had participants walk through different protocols of entry into the barns, and gave instructions on how to complete that. And then 4 to 8 weeks later, they went back and had those participants enter the barns in the same manner without getting a refresher training. And what they found with that is that they were almost 1.5 times more likely to have errors just because of that gap in time. If you don't use it, you lose it. You start to forget, and you start to make mistakes. And that could be, forgetting to take off your baseball cap when you go into the barn, not closing a door behind you because you're unfamiliar with the protocols, or potentially even dragging dirty footwear across our line of separation. So I think this is a good reminder that for those of you on the farm, making sure that we're auditing the practices of everybody coming to that farm and doing repeat training, even if you think that they don't need it because they've already had it recently. So again, who's doing that auditing, who's doing that training, making sure that we're staying on top of our biosecurity practices in order to keep our birds healthy. There are a lot of biosecurity resources out there, and I feel like I preach the biosecurity all the time, but just to know that there's other resources that might be available to help keep things new and interesting. So U of M Extension has some great resources, and the website's listed here on the slide. USDA-APHIS also has a Defend the Flock campaign, where there's a lot of good resources. So if you're kind of looking for new ways to make sure that biosecurity is interesting and different to the staff that you're training, these might be some resources to look into. I also wanted to touch a little bit about our NPIP biosecurity principles and audits. And as many of you probably are aware, these basic biosecurity principles were implemented and incorporated into the NPIP program standards back in 2016 at the biennial conference that of course happened after a 2015 High Path outbreak. And these are paper-based audits of the written biosecurity plan, and it requires that the audits are reviewed by the official state agency every 2 years. And in Minnesota, that official state agency is the Minnesota Board of Animal Health. But again, kind of reaching back to where I was a slide or two ago, these are paper-based audits, and it's a good review of your written plan, but it doesn't assess implementation on the farm. And that's where we rely on you as the biosecurity coordinator and the producers to make sure that things are being done properly. There is still some value and importance, of course, in having that audit done, and that it makes you eligible for indemnity and compensation in the event that you are and your birds are infected with either a high path avian influenza or a low path H5 or H7. And so the documents that you sign in order to be eligible for indemnity states that you have a biosecurity plan that was being followed at the time of that introduction. And just a reminder on the auditing process in Minnesota, and for those of you who might have operations in other states, this process might be different, but at the start of our auditing year, we look at who's coming due for an audit in that year, and the MPTL, or the board, reaches out to producers to just gather some information. So we want to know who the biosecurity coordinator is, because it might have changed from the last time we audited, which farms will be included in that audit, and how we best complete that audit. And then when it's actually time to gather that material, we'll make an official request to you. So you might get a letter at the start of the year looking for information, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to send in your auditing materials right away. We'll reach out to you and let you know when that is needed. Once that material comes into the lab and into the MPTL, we do a quick review of the materials just to make sure that we've got everything that we've asked for. And then we will forward that out to an auditor. And we've got an auditing team of about 8 individuals who will look through those plans and make sure that it's in line with our biosecurity standards and protocols there. And then once that auditor has done their final review, it comes back to me as the official state agency to review that plan for consistency, to make sure that all of our auditors are reviewing those plans in a consistent manner and that it's in compliance with our audit guidelines. And then once finalized, all of the audit material that we've been provided for that audit, whether it was paper mail that came in through, into the office, or whether it was emails, all of that gets destroyed or deleted with the exception of the audit form. So we don't maintain your plan, we don't maintain your maps. That's your responsibility to make sure that those are being maintained and reviewed and updated. So that when we come and ask for it again, it's refreshed and ready to go. And an area that's been a little confusing for some of our folks is during our High Path 2022 event, for those who were in a control area, you may have had to complete a control area biosecurity audit. And this was an audit that was required by USDA for those who wanted to move birds into that buffer zone. So that's kind of that 3 to 10 kilometer zone within that control zone. In order to be eligible for indemnity, they required that you pass an on-site biosecurity plan audit. And so we were conducting those via Teams, and it required that a biosecurity audit checklist was completed, as well as an EPI questionnaire. And I'm just mentioning this because this is a different audit and an auditing process than what we asked for the NPIP biosecurity plan. So it might seem like you're being audited a lot, but it's for different reasons. And so when we come back to ask for that NPIP biosecurity plan, it will have been at least 2 years since we audited you, unless there's some other reason why it needed to be done at a different time. Some tips and reminders for your audits is make sure that your plan is being reviewed by the biosecurity coordinator at least once a year. And so our expectation is that you as the coordinator are reviewing that plan, reading through it, making sure there's no edits or changes that need to be made. And I just want to point out that that review by the biosecurity coordinator is different than the training that needs to happen by all of the workers. So we expect that all workers on the farm be trained on the biosecurity plan at least yearly, and that training is documented. And when we say workers, that means paid staff, unpaid staff, weekend help, holiday help, temporary help. That means everybody. So if you bring in somebody to help cover while you're on vacation, even if it's just for a few days, we need to make sure that that training that you provide to them is documented and that they're following your protocols. Also, I just want to note that welfare training, we see a lot of welfare training documentation submitted as part of that audit. That's training that's provided for welfare, and it's not necessarily for biosecurity. And so we're looking for the training that's being provided for your biosecurity plan and protocols. Pest control is another area that we sometimes struggle with getting the appropriate documentation on. You're asked to provide pest control because our job is to try to make sure that what you say is in your plan for how you'll be monitoring pest control is actually being implemented. And so we want to actually see the specific dates that your bait stations are being checked, whether it's by you or whether it's by a rodent control company, and it needs to match the schedule or protocol that's written in your plan. So if your plan says you check them every 2 weeks, we want to see that the dates in your audit checklists are every 2 weeks as well. And then lastly, for you to provide as much detail in your plan as possible is so helpful from an auditor's standpoint, because these are paper audits. We're not on the farm able to visualize what's happening. So the more detail we have, the better it is for our auditors to visualize and understand those protocols that are occurring on farm. And lastly, it doesn't matter how often I audit your paper-based biosecurity. It's ultimately on you guys to make sure that what's happening is keeping your birds safe. So my job is to provide assurance to others that everyone's doing the best job that they can, that there's a plan in place and that they're following it to the best of their ability. It's your job to make sure that the boots on the ground plans are actually being followed and implemented. So, going back to those early slides where we talked about who's auditing what's happening on the farm, that's kind of where you guys come into play to make sure that everybody who's coming on or near or in your barns are following the protocols that you have in place. Most importantly, and I know Dr. Lauer might be on this call, say what you do and do what you say. Before I move into any additional NPIP updates, are there any questions that have come in through the chat that I should be addressing?
I don't see any right now, Shauna.
Perfect. Okay. Just a couple more updates here on the National Poultry Improvement Plan. Something that shouldn't necessarily be impacting those of you on the call, but I think it's important that you're aware of. We have antigen that we use to test for a disease called Pullorum typhoid disease. Much of that testing is being done in our backyard in non-commercial flocks, but it's also used at the laboratory to look for Salmonella pullorum and typhoid. AVS Bio, which is a company that used to be known as Charles Rivers Laboratory, is the only manufacturer of this PT antigen, and it is currently on back order. Unfortunately, this is not the first time that we've dealt with it, but we're in a little bit of a different situation this time with this back order in that we don't have any additional antigen to provide. And so we're very low on our own supply. This should not affect the commercial flocks in Minnesota because, again, most of that testing that we do is in our backyard facilities. But we do have a contingency plan in place, and that has been submitted to the NPIP office. Hopefully, by November, antigen will be available. Again, fingers crossed. And also, so that you guys are aware, the 46th biannual NPIP conference is scheduled for August 27th through the 30th in 2024. And so if you have changes to either the Code of Federal Regulation that impacts NPIP or any of the NPIP program standards, you can submit those proposed changes by March 27th to be considered at the biennial to have those changes implemented. And if anybody in Minnesota is interested in being an official delegate for NPIP, you can notify me, or if you're in another state, you can reach out to your official state agency to make that request. And lastly, just a couple testing reminders in Minnesota. We've seen some confusion and maybe just some sloppiness over the summer with our testing submissions with there's a lot of different types of submission forms that are floating around there after our High Path event, in addition to our routine NPIP submission forms. So just doing a double check and making sure that we're using the right submission form for the right type of submission. So all of our Board of Animal Health NPIP routine monitoring forms are available on our website. Any diagnostic testing that you need to do or non-regulatory testing, those submission forms are available on the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab website, and those websites are on the screen. And then finally, the barcodes that we use during High Path, you can keep using those if you want. They're not required, but it is another one of those use it or lose it types of things. So if you still have those barcodes, or if you'd like more, let us know. We encourage you to keep using it just so that it's familiar in case we ever have to do it again. And that's what I have to share.
Thank you, Shauna. Do you, maybe put you on the spot a little bit, do you have, is there any lab updates in regards to if folks have a suspected high path, after hours, weekends? Is there anything that you can share for folks
Sure.
in do that process?
Yeah, so if you have any concerns about your flock and need to have that tested, and I'm sorry that should have been on every single slide that I just put up there, please call the Board of Animal Health to make sure that testing gets arranged. So you can call me directly, and I can enter my phone number into the chat on evenings and weekends. That's fine. Right now, emergency testing or after hours testing is still happening in St. Paul on Saturdays and at the MPTL in Romer on Sundays. And so that protocol is the same. Our High Path Avian Influenza hotline is still in effect as well, at least through the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And we will share some of the resources that Shauna mentioned, as well as phone numbers and websites and whatnot, and a follow-up email to this. So are there any questions for Shauna? Looks like you answered everybody's questions, Shauna. All right, thank you. All right, next we have some individuals from USDA Wildlife Services. So earlier this year on one of our webinars, we discussed a new program for wildlife biosecurity assessments. And so we're going to have Jason and Anna share kind of a refresher of what that program is, what the goal of the program is, and then provide an update of the status of the program. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ashley. So just want to give a quick update on our program and our part that we're doing here. So in the spring of 2023, USDA Wildlife Services received some funding for a pilot project to conduct wildlife biosecurity assessments at commercial poultry facilities in 4 states: Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, and South Dakota. The primary objective of the project is to be conducting evaluations of poultry facilities that will focus on identifying strategies to reduce the risk of high path AI transmission from wildlife to domestic birds. So the assessments are going to include inspections and provide recommendations for the facilities regarding their structure for wildlife access points. Maybe there's some attractants that are attracting wildlife to the site or into their barns. If there's any areas that the wildlife are frequently using, maybe they're loafing or nesting or roosting in some sites. We also want to identify any sources of food that wildlife have access to. If there's the delivery system is allowing wildlife to get into that, there's a potential for a disease to be introduced into the domestic birds through that. Same thing with water. For sources of water, it's a strong attractant for wildlife, and if it's there and available to wildlife, they may be able to use it and thus spread diseases. And the final thing we want to look at is any waste disposal at the facilities, just to make sure that there's not attracting or not available to wildlife. So in addition to the surveys and the information we'll be collecting at each site, we may also be able to provide some mitigation efforts. So by mitigation, I mean by harassing or hazing wildlife from the site. We might be able to remove some wildlife if their densities or their numbers are too high and they pose a risk. And then in addition, after the assessments and any kind of direct control that we would do, we would probably be doing some on-site monitoring of wildlife, following up after we do these assessments and the surveys, just to see if our efforts are providing effective. Some of the goals and some of the objectives that we're trying to do are to better understand the wildlife and their seasonal patterns that could be a risk to poultry facilities and any threats that they pose. Participation in the project is going to be voluntary. So at this point, what we're thinking, the first wildlife biosecurity assessments that we conduct at the facilities we would likely do them at a facility that has had a high path AI outbreak or a depopulation in the past. And the thought behind this is that we may be able to visit that facility and provide some recommendations or identify some vulnerabilities at that facility that producers could mitigate to limit the access of wildlife to their domestic poultry. And the same thing, if we identify attractants around the facility, whether there's a source of food or water or a roosting site nearby, we may be able to mitigate that risk as well. So I want to stress that, our primary objective for our work is not to test and sample and look for high path AI, but we may do some testing and sampling. And what it would do is it would augment the ongoing surveillance that USDA does, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Minnesota DNR does across the state. It would augment those samples throughout the state if a facility did become positive with high path AI. So if we do identify high path AI on the site, we would likely increase our sampling efforts at that site to identify what species may be spreading or may contain the avian influenza. So we started, the project was kind of initiated late this spring, and the biggest challenge that we're having right now are people to fill the positions that we have available. At this time, we have myself and Anna Schneider. She's a wildlife biologist and is very experienced with a background in wildlife diseases. So right now we're looking to fill 9 more positions in Minnesota. We have announced these positions through a federal job announcement platform. And also now we're looking at other job boards, universities, the Wildlife Society, and even we've reached out to the Sportsman's Weekly Outdoor News and ran a little ad in their newspaper. So we are starting to pick up some interest. So we're getting a few people inquiring. So we're hoping that we will be able to start filling some of these positions in the next couple of months. In the meantime, it may be myself, maybe Anna, or it may be some other current employees with Wildlife Services that we have on board with us now that would do the first wildlife biosecurity assessments at the facilities in Minnesota. But our hope is that we can start doing these in October for our first ones. In addition to this, we're also in the process of putting together a steering committee. And the reason for the committee is to keep everyone involved with this work informed on the progress of the project and to have points of contacts for experts in the various agencies and entities that we're going to be working with. So at this time, we've identified a few individuals that would likely be members of the steering committee. And we're also looking for a few more with other cooperating and participating agencies to sit on that board. And what we would like to do is we'd like to seek some feedback and input from anybody that's interested in this to maybe give direction if they're seeing something that we're not noticing, that we need to go off in a different direction or collect some additional information to help the project as a whole. So that's kind of a quick background on what USDA Wildlife Services role is with this. And if anybody has any questions at this time, I'm happy to take those.
Any questions? So Jason, one question that we as staff have received since the kind of rollout and the announcement of this program is, so for these audits, the information that you guys collect, where will that information be housed? Who will be able to see that information? And you just mentioned now some high path testing, sampling and testing, that as well. Where will that information be shared, and who will have access to it?
When we're collecting data, the data it stays with Wildlife Services in that we do have a national database, but all of the data will be entered and collected on an app. And our disease program, I believe, is building that app right now as far as the data that we're going to be collecting. I'm expecting that our leadership with our disease program as information comes available, they'll probably be disseminating that information. Anything that we can release, I'm guessing that we will also have a part in it too. If there's anything that we can send out to folks to keep them in the loop on what's going on and what we're finding. So that's my understanding of it right now. And as far as the sampling goes, I know we ship the samples away, of course, to a lab to be tested. And typically what happens there is our disease biologists, they will monitor the results of those and that kind of thing. So again, the disease program is likely going to be heavily involved with any kind of information releases with that.
And then one additional question. So if there are folks who are interested in participating in a wildlife biosecurity assessment, are you taking any and all who are interested, or are you focusing on specific areas across the state?
So at this time, we've opened it up pretty much completely, where anybody interested, we're considering anybody interested. It would be best if they had a wildlife background, but it's not required. Anything that people are not trained to do, we will provide training for them. But right now at this time, it's pretty much open, and anybody interested can contact myself. Typically what we're going to do is we're going to request transcripts, or potentially, I should say, we're going to request a resume and potentially transcripts if there's education being used to determine the level of the wage level. So the salary level. So right now it's pretty much wide open, and we're just looking for anybody that's interested, and then we'll go through and filter through the people that we get interest from, and then we'll likely be conducting interviews and that kind of. But they can reach out to myself on that if anybody's interested.
So I apologize. I probably didn't ask the question clear enough. I meant for growers. If growers want to get assessed.
Okay.
Are you assessing farms across the state, or are you focusing on geographical areas? And then how, if folks are interested, how do they get their name on the list?
So I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So yeah, anybody can voluntarily offer to be a producer and to have us visit. They can contact us. I'm sure we're going to be getting some. We'll be inquiring from some of the some producers in like the growers associations as well, if they have any feedback on their facilities or producers that are interested. If we get names or contacts from producers that they would like this done on their facilities, we can absolutely do that. So I think if they reach out to their local agencies and their groups that they're working with, if they reach out to myself or Wildlife Services as a state, it would get back to us, and I would absolutely would say that we'll be taking sites through that method as well. Does that better answer the question?
That is, thank you. I apologize if I didn't ask it.
No, I'm sorry.
So, okay, any other questions? Again, we'll share information, and we'll share Jason and Anna's contact information in a follow-up email to this webinar as well. So if you have any questions, cook it in the back of your mind as we continue through our next couple of speakers. Just type it in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next on our agenda, we were supposed to have somebody from USDA to discuss some modifications to indemnity, but unfortunately, they're not able to join us today because of a scheduling conflict. And so, as you guys may remember, at our previous webinar that we did in the spring, we had Dr. Schaefbauer discuss some potential changes that weren't public at that time in regard to USDA indemnity compensation or programming. And so we were hoping that she could share with us some updates to that. We will send that out to everybody. And these webinars, this isn't a one and done. We will have more of these as we progress through the fall, especially if we do see a spike in high path cases with the fall migration. But even if not, just to keep folks kind of on the forefront of thoughts in regards to high path prevention, but also in response. And so I am now going to share my screen to talk about some resources. Some of these were already mentioned by folks here today. But I wanted to review a few things because I think, as Shauna had mentioned, muscle memory is important. And if you haven't, like with your biosecurity plans, if it hasn't been front of mind and folks haven't been reminded of specific protocols, there's a high likelihood that they're going to forget it or not implement it properly. And the same goes for just reminding folks of the resources that are out there. Some of them have been updated, but just also reminding folks where they are and kind of what they look like. And so I'm going to run through a few examples of resources. So for those who haven't been on the MTGA website for a while, here's the landing screen for the website, and you'll see in this upper corner here, members login. And so whenever we reference webinars or items that are on the members only section of the website, this is where you would go to log into that. If you've not logged in a long time and you don't remember your login or password, give a call to the MTGA office and we will reconnect you with what that is. And so when you log into the MTGA members only website, this is a snippet of what it looks like. And so there is a wealth of knowledge and information that you could ever want in regards to the turkey industry or the broader poultry industry as a whole on the members only portal. So I'm going to specifically talk about this tab right here, the disease information and alerts tab. And that is what this looks like. And so when we talk about High Path resources and phone numbers, you can find all of this information here. And so the previous webinars that we've recorded will be housed here. But then also various handouts that have either been developed by MTGA, USDA, or any other agency, Department of Ag, and then also in collaboration with the University of Minnesota. There's a lot of questions that we get in peak High Path positive situations about forms. Obviously, the go-to person to get your forms is going to be somebody who is handling your case on your particular farm. But for reference, if you have questions or want to look over forms, we have these linked directly to the USDA website. And so I'm going to stop sharing this screen and share a different one that is the actual website, I believe. Yep. Just to show you what additional resources that we have. So there's been a lot of questions that we've gotten over the last year in regards to composting. And so we do have some composting information there, but also the University of Minnesota is a wealth of knowledge in regards to composting resources. And so you heard Dr. Voss reference University of Minnesota, Board of Animal Health, and USDA. You can go ahead and search out those resources individually, or you can come here to our website where they're all linked for you all in one spot as a reference for anybody and everybody that would want to see those. We also have housed here are the disease alerts. And so disease alerts are sent via email to members. And for those who have subscribed to the text message services, via text message right to your phone. It's the same information, just however you choose to receive it is how you'll get that information. And then again, it's housed here for folks to find. And so again, just a reminder of maybe the resources that we had available. Again, we'll send that all in an email as a follow-up to everybody. And because we are one speaker short, we're going to be yielding back some of your lunch time to you all. So if anybody, again, has any questions for any of our speakers that we have here today, go ahead and type those into the chat. If not, we'll be sending out shortly a follow-up email that has the references that were spoken about today, contact information where relevant, and information about potential upcoming webinars. So thank you all for joining us today. And again, as we approach, fall migration, as Dr. Voss had noted, it's time to be vigilant and to review all of our plans and retrain all of our staff so we can prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. So thank you.